I was born in a small urban-type settlement. We lived in a big house together with my parents, grandmother, and grandfather. When I was in the 7th grade, my parents wanted to move to the city. I didn't want to leave my hometown, especially since my grandparents refused to move. But my parents managed to convince me by explaining the importance of the move. They also promised that we could visit my grandparents anytime. It was especially sad to leave because of my best friend Juliana. Since childhood, we were inseparable. I was very sad about the separation from her. She always said that I was the only one who understood her. She had very strict parents who constantly wanted her to do everything for them and put herself second. They disapproved of any of her hobbies, even though Juliana was a creative person who loved drawing, knitting, and sewing toys and clothes. Instead, her parents gave her a civics textbook, hoping she would become a lawyer in the future. Their family was poor, and her parents wanted to fulfill their unrealized ambitions through their daughter. They instilled in her the idea that only she could save their family from poverty and forbade her from engaging in any other interests, fearing she would end up with a non-prestigious job. Juliana could only draw when she was visiting me. I felt so sorry for her. Her parents also often compared her to the son of my mom's friend, who loved math and computer science. Unlike their unsuccessful daughter, whose favorite subjects were art and crafts. "He's a good boy, he'll become rich and help his family, but you won't," her parents would say. This pressure caused her a lot of suffering, especially after my move. Despite this, we remained best friends, though we saw each other less often. We visited only a couple of times a month. 8 years have passed since then. She didn't become a lawyer, and her parents' discontent only grew. I tried to support her. When it became difficult for my grandmother to manage the house, I started visiting the village more often to help with cleaning and grocery shopping. It was hard to balance this with work, but I had to help. Because of the constant pressure on my friend, she no longer knows what she wants and can't say no. All her friends and relatives like to take advantage of her, asking for things even if it's inconvenient for her, and she can't refuse. Everyone got used to it and took advantage of her, sometimes to the point of absurdity. The last time I visited Juliana, we were sitting in her room. Suddenly, her mom called her loudly and asked her to come to the kitchen urgently. I went with Juliana to see what had happened. Stopping around the corner of the room, I overheard. "What took you so long?" her mom said angrily. Juliana asked. "What's wrong?" Her mom asked her to pour some tea when the kettle was right in front of her. She could easily have done it herself, but for some reason asked her daughter. Then she ordered her to change the bed linen in their room. This made me very angry. I tried to explain to Juliana that she needed to value herself and learn to say no, especially when requests became so absurd. She just felt sad. I saw how she suffered, how she was afraid to refuse. It was clear she was depressed. I really wanted to help her and told her that she couldn't always please others to her own detriment and suggested she see a psychologist, as I regularly go for consultations myself. My friend listened to my recommendation and said she would reach out when she was ready. After hard-working days, the weekend finally came. The weather was great, and I couldn't wait to visit my grandparents and see my friend again. When I arrived in the village, I helped my grandmother around the house and then brought out a delicious cake, and we started having tea. I was telling her about my work week. Suddenly, something hit the window. My grandmother and I jumped in surprise. I angrily went outside, fully confident that it was children playing. Going out of the house and approaching the window, I saw a plastic bottle on the ground with something inside. Taking it, I headed back inside. My grandmother was also surprised by the find. I was about to throw away the bottle when my grandmother stopped me and said there seemed to be a note inside. "What if it's a letter from Juliana? She disappeared recently." Her words stunned me. My first thought was that my poor friend had been driven away. I struggled to get the paper out of the bottle. It said, "Do you want to find a priceless treasure? Go to the river." On the other side was a drawing of a pier where fishermen usually fish. Knowing my creative friend, only she could come up with something like this. Well, Juliana, I thought, you never cease to amaze. This was a good trick about the disappearance. Maybe people will start appreciating you more. I shared my thoughts with my grandmother. She didn't approve, but promised not to tell anyone. Then I headed to the pier, as indicated in the note. On the way, I thought Juliana was waiting for me there. When I arrived at the pier, I didn't see anyone. This made me sad. After some thought, I decided to look for clues, but found nothing. Disappointed, I started to go home when it dawned on me. I hadn't looked under the pier, maybe the clue was there? I returned to the river, lay down on the pier, and looked under it. There was another bottle with a note attached under the logs. With great difficulty, I retrieved it and pulled out a new note. It said, "You're not bad. The treasure awaits you in the forest where the old treehouse is. But know this, you won't find the treasure during the day, only in Hades' realm will you find it." What nonsense. I started thinking about what I had read. I barely remember the location of the treehouse. Climbing up there was very dangerous. I could fall since the ladder was already decaying. What does Hades' realm have to do with this? I thought. It seemed that Juliana had completely lost her mind from the pressure. Suddenly, a terrifying thought came to me. What if she had climbed up to the old treehouse and fallen? What if she's lying on the ground now? The step could have broken, or worse, the floor might have given way under her weight. What if she's lying there unconscious? There was no time to waste, so I ran to find the treehouse. I remembered it was in the forest. To get there, you had to walk 2 kilometers into the forest along an old path. I found the house only at sunset. I started looking for the promised treasure. After inspecting everything around, I realized there was nothing there. My intuition told me the treasure might be at the top, but climbing up was very scary and high. The house was already half collapsed, and some of the steps were missing. A sane person wouldn't climb up there, but curiosity got the better of me, so I carefully started climbing up. Midway up, a step broke off, and I fell down. I came to in the dark. My head was throbbing a little, but overall, I was fine. Looking at the tree, I was surprised to see a glow-in-the-dark inscription on it that wasn't visible during the day, apparently only appearing in the dark. It said, "The treasure is very close. Look for the right photo at the cemetery. Hades is ready to give you a gift." The inscription gave me chills. What if Juliana didn't do this, but some psycho? In complete darkness, I went back home. There were many sounds around, and I was especially afraid of encountering a wild animal. Finding my way back was extremely difficult. At dinner, I didn't tell my grandparents about my adventure and fall so they wouldn't worry. The next day was my last day in the village, and I wanted to solve the mystery. In the morning, I headed to the cemetery. On the way, I felt like a foolish person, solving some childish riddles. Didn't I almost break my neck yesterday because of this? But my inner child demanded to find the treasure. Feeling like a child ready for any adventure was also pleasant. Arriving at the cemetery, I felt uneasy. There was no one around, only numerous graves. After walking half the cemetery, I started getting angry. I didn't understand what I was looking for. After about 20 minutes, I stumbled upon a creepy find. Tears welled up in my eyes, and I wanted to run away from there. On a tombstone lay a photo of Juliana in a frame. Looking closer, I realized it wasn't her grave. My first thought was, who could have placed a photo of a living person here? It's a terrible omen. I quickly took the framed photo and started pulling out the pictures. Inside was another picture of Hades, the god of the underworld, from a cartoon, and a photo of an elderly woman. From the tombstone, I realized it was her grave, so I put her portrait back in the frame and placed it next to the grave. Turning over Juliana's photo, I saw an inscription. "But who knows, maybe you are also a brave hero who can go to the world of the dead to take the treasure from the god of death." Taking Hades' picture, I looked at the other side. There was a drawing of the abandoned treehouse where I had been yesterday. From it, an arrow pointed 200 meters away, with a cross marked as on treasure maps. I was too lazy to go there, so I decided to go home for lunch. Tired of these childish games. During lunch, I calmed down a bit and started. Taking Hades' picture, I looked at the other side. There was a drawing of the abandoned treehouse where I had been yesterday. From it, an arrow pointed 200 meters away, with a cross marked as on treasure maps. I was too lazy to go there, so I decided to go home for lunch. Tired of these childish games. During lunch, I calmed down a bit and started worrying about my friend. I wanted to go and check out what the treasure was, but it was already hard to make it before sunset, and I didn't want to walk back in the dark. Nevertheless, I decided to take a risk, taking a knife with me. The journey took a long time, and many thoughts crossed my mind. It was scary to go there, but knowing myself, if I didn't go, my curiosity would torment me all week. When I reached the treehouse, I was upset that it was already getting dark, so I hurried. Getting to the designated spot, I was shocked by what I saw. I started shaking. There was a picture of my friend and Hades, the god of the underworld. Also, a bell hung on the cross, with a string going into the ground. A small tube was also sticking out of the ground. On the other side of Juliana's photo, it said, "What could be more important than friendship? Many cultures say true friendship is the greatest treasure. But unfortunately, it's already in Hades' realm." The inscription made me very uneasy. It was already dark outside, and everything indicated that Juliana was buried there. I very reluctantly approached the tube sticking out of the ground and called out a couple of times, "Juliana! Juliana! Juliana!" But there was no answer. My intuition told me my friend was there. I started digging the ground with a knife and my hands. The ground was fresh, so I was able to dig deeper. Adrenaline kept me from feeling tired, but tears were streaming down my face. I was having a real hysterical fit. I was terrified of seeing her dead in a coffin. Suddenly, the bell rang. I screamed in surprise and continued digging more vigorously. After about 40 minutes in complete darkness, the knife hit something hard. It was a coffin. Opening the lid, I saw Juliana. She looked terrible. I untied her hands and feet and removed the gag from her mouth. We hugged and cried. As we walked towards the village for help, Juliana told me how a stranger had offered her a ride home. Then she woke up in the coffin. She said she had a feeling she shouldn't get in the car with him, but it felt awkward to refuse, as always. After this incident, Juliana listened to me and signed up to see a psychologist. Over time, she learned to say no to people and began to value herself. Now she has moved to the city with me and found a great job she loves. Just recently, however, we heard terrible news. It turned out that another girl had been kidnapped that day. Someone threw a bottle at her window, but it was just discarded, so the girl was never found. Honestly, I still feel uneasy. What would have happened if I had thrown away that bottle or stopped looking? What if I had met the same fate at the end?